The water boiled over before I noticed the hiss. Starch froth slipped across the stovetop and sizzled against hot iron, a white lace that smoked in my small kitchen. My phone bled light on the counter, bright as a flare in the dim room. The text sat there, blunt and tidy, like an invoice for something I'd never agreed to buy, pay, or get out of this family. Your choice. The window over the sink held a square of April night porch light glowing in the parking lot rain, needling the asphalt, a car door slamming somewhere far below. I stared at the message until the letters blurred and my hands began to shake. I could hear my father's patient voice behind those words, my mother's brittle breath, my sister's echoing sobs like a choir arranged against me. Somewhere the timer on the oven beeped. I didn't move. If you've ever been asked to pay for your seat at your own table, I know how that silence feels. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've carried a family on your back until your knees buckled, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Make sure you're subscribed. There's more to this story than a single cruel text. But to understand how that message ended an old life and started a new one, you have to know where the pattern began. I grew up in a white-columned colonial on a quiet street in Greenwich, Connecticut. The driveway was always polished blacktop glossy after a good rinse, twin luxury cars parked just so chrome catching the afternoon sun. Inside the hallway walls were a museum of OS-coordinated sweaters, careful smiles, frames straightened before company arrived. My father James worked in luxury branding and wore tailored suits that never wrinkled. My mother Diana lived at the country club, cheeks brushed the color of a pink grapefruit, fundraising for galas where the napkins matched the flowers. They loved order optics and a story that looked good in photos. My story in their telling was simple. I was the reliable daughter, responsible by nature. I kept my bed, made my grades high, my voice calm. By 16, I learned how to keep a calendar with no room for mess classes, part-time shifts, at the bookstore SAT prep, the occasional movie with friends if the week could spare it. On my 16th birthday, I blew out candles at our oak dining table and unwrapped SAT guides and a sensible laptop. The gifts were practical, and everyone congratulated me for being the kind of girl who would put them to use. The summer Amanda turned 16, a silver BMW eased up our street with a bow looped across the hood like a ribbon on a cake. She stood barefoot on the front steps, hair loose, mouth open in the soft kind of shock that photographs well. My father held the keys aloft. My mother said, "Our butterfly deserves to fly." I stood beside the hedges and clapped, telling myself the sting in my throat was pride. Amanda is bright in the way that turns heads. She laughs easily, cries easily, and believes that a certain kind of night can change a life. Prom, homecoming, the big spring party at the yacht club. When she called something important, my parents absorbed the word like a verdict. "You're naturally independent," my mother would say to me over the clink of ice in a highball glass. Amanda is more sensitive. The sentence always ended with a smile, as if sensitivity were currency that bought permission. Years layered that script with varnish. Holidays, report cards, internships. I went to NYU on a partial scholarship and picked up weekend shifts to cover what the scholarship didn't. My parents nodded appreciatively at my drive and wired Amanda money for horseback lessons and a dress that photographed well in golden hour. After graduation, I moved to a small place in Brooklyn with 2 roommates, stacked soup cans in the cabinet, and paid off my loans early because spreadsheets make me feel safe. Success in my mind meant never needing to ask. 3 months before the text, I moved back to Connecticut, closer to work, closer to family dinners I realized I'd missed. My mother hugged me under the porch light and breathed, "It's wonderful to have you home." The dining room felt familiar, polished oak, a vase of peonies silverware placed with a ruler's precision. "You can help Amanda with applications," she added, refilling my water as if it were already decided. I said yes. I say yes, easily. The drip began again, quiet at first. Can you cover dinner? I forgot my wallet from my mother, smiling at the server. Spot me until payday. From my father, voice pitched confidential and warm. School supplies from Amanda, which meant headphones that cost more than a week of groceries. I told myself generosity was just love with numbers attached. I told myself it was natural to give more when you had more. Sunday dinners became gentle audits disguised as conversation. Jennifer's daughter just bought her parents a little place in Florida, my father would say, spearing asparagus and watching my face. Isn't that lovely, my mother would add. The room would hold still, as if waiting for me to announce a plan. I learned to smile and redirect. How was the club's charity auction, I'd ask, and someone would laugh, and the moment would pass, but it didn't dissolve. It tucked itself somewhere behind my ribs. When prom season rolled in, our house turned into a showroom. Fabric swatches, photos of gowns held at angles for the best light, talk of limos and the new restaurant in town where the parents liked to be seen. I need the perfect dress, Amanda said one Sunday, her eyes fever bright. Lily's getting custom from a designer in the city. My mother's fingers curled around her coffee cup as if she were holding something precious. Whatever you want, sweetheart. It's a milestone. I tried to slide a lesson onto the table like a coaster under a sweating glass. When I went to prom, I saved from my job and still found a beautiful dress, I said lightly. Earning part of it made the night feel. Not everyone wants to be a workaholic. Amanda cut in lashes, low mouth, straight. My parents looked away the way people do when a dog barks in a nice restaurant. No correction, no boundary. The moment, set like concrete. The demand arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was sliding a blazer off the back of my chair. Send me $3,600 for prom. The list beneath it read like a bill at a boutique hotel. Designer dress, $200. Shoes and accessories, $500. Hair, makeup, nails, $400. Limo share, $500. Dinner at Luciano's, $300. After-party contribution, $400. Weekend at Sarah's beach house, $300. There was no hello, no please, just an amount and a deadline Friday to secure everything. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling under my palm and counted the zeros twice. My first reply was careful. That's a very high amount, Amanda. Have you talked to Mom and Dad? Maybe you can cover part of it with a job. I'm happy to help a little, but... The dots bubbled and stopped, bubbled and stopped. They said, ask you. You have the big finance job. I need this by Friday. I called her. Voicemail. I left a message about values, about meaning, about special nights, not depending on price tags. By the time I set the phone down, my mother was calling. I stepped into a conference room with glass walls and watched people's reflections drift past as my mother's voice slipped through my ear like ice water. Why are you being difficult about your sister's prom? She didn't ask. Not really, she declared. I told her $3,600 for a dance was outrageous. I offered $300. That won't cover her shoes. She gasped, as if I'd asked Amanda to arrive wrapped in butcher paper. You know how sensitive she is to social pressure. I reminded her sensitivity and indulgence are not the same thing. She suggested I was jealous of a night I didn't have. Words bent, meaning thinned. When my father called, his tone was soft, businesslike, the way he spoke when he thought persuasion was polite. We may have suggested you'd want to contribute, he said, and the we slipped like a cufflink into place. He praised my responsibility, explained Amanda's wiring, as if we were discussing an appliance. There will be time for financial responsibility later, he said. Right now we are protecting her confidence. I said boundaries. He said family. I said respect. He said loyalty. When we hung up, the line felt oily in my hand. That evening, the group text came dressed like a verdict. We've discussed this as a family. Your sister is in tears. If you can't put family first and send the money, reconsider your place in this family. Pay or get out of this family. Your choice. It landed between the cutting board and the steam lifting from the pot. Light flickered under the range hood. Rain thudded softly on the window screen. The room tilted. I caught the counter with both hands and stood there bent at the waist, listening to water hiss and the sharp little breaths of someone trying not to cry. The truth was so simple, it felt obscene. My place at the table had a price. Not gratitude, not conversation, not love, in the battered ordinary way families give it rides to the airport soup, when you're sick a hand on your back, when crowds press in. A dollar amount, an exchange rate for belonging. I turned off the burner and watched the bubbles stumble and sink. The apartment smelled faintly of garlic and rain. My phone buzzed again and again, my mother's name, my father's name, Amanda's first initial. A photograph on the fridge caught my eye last Christmas, our arms looped around each other, mouths wide in a choreographed joy. I remembered the sharpness of the gift wrap and the way Amanda's cellophane-bagged cookies got the loudest praise, while the handbag I'd saved 2 months for vanished into my mother's closet with a nod. How many times had I told myself this was simply love in our family's language? How many times had I translated neglect as independence, so it would hurt less to speak? I slid to the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. The tile was cold through my jeans, grounding in a way. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like distant traffic. I set the phone face down and covered my eyes with the heel of my hand the way I did as a child when storms rolled in and thunder made the windows tremble. A knock rattled the door a minute later. 3 taps, a pause. 2 taps. Taylor's knock, from the years we lived down the block and shared homework and secrets and the dumb belief that good behavior earned safety. She stepped in with rain on her shoulders and a paper sack that smelled like Thai basil. She looked at my face first, then at the stove, the phone, the text still open like a neon sign. "They didn't," she said, already knowing. "They did." I whispered and felt the words leave like something I didn't need to carry anymore. We ate at the little table by the window while the parking lot filled with puddles and the world softened under the rain. Taylor listened. "She doesn't decorate the truth. That's not a family request. That's a bill," she said. "They're charging you admission." The line found a place to sit in my chest. It didn't hurt, not in the old way. It settled. I pulled my laptop closer and opened a blank sheet, fingers hovering, unsure. Numbers always calm me. They line up, they add, they show their work. I thought about dinners, covered transfers, labeled just until Friday, gifts purchased because silence at the table felt more expensive than the receipt. I thought about a credit card I'd co-signed for my sister because my mother called from a boutique with panic in her voice. I thought about all the tiny yeses that had built a bridge they could drive across whenever they liked. Outside, a car door slammed. A man laughed, keys jangling. The rain softened to a mist against the glass. I typed a single word in the subject line of a new email, decision, and let the cursor blink like a heartbeat. Taylor rested her elbow on the table and waited without speaking. "Quiet can be a rope if you let it." The phone buzzed again, insistent, a trapped insect under glass. I didn't touch it. I drew a steady breath and stared at the blank page like a horizon I hadn't considered until now. The night's first true stillness settled, the kind that comes when a storm moves east and the house remembers how to be quiet. Somewhere between the rain easing and the basil cooling, the question shifted. It wasn't, "Can I afford to pay?" It was, "What does it cost me to stay?" The number attached to that answer didn't fit on any invoice. And there, under the porch light, glow from the parking lot, and the refrigerator's low hum, I felt the smallest click inside, like a lock easing open. I closed the laptop without typing another word. "Will you stay a while?" I asked, and Taylor nodded. The night had more to say. The choice would still be there in the morning. Taylor stayed that night, falling asleep on the couch beneath the thin glow of the hallway light. I lay awake for hours, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the spaces where my thoughts used to rush. The phone on the counter blinked again and again, unanswered. I had never ignored my parents before. The stillness was strange, almost reverent. For the first time in my life, silence felt like protection. Morning arrived gray and damp. The city outside my window smelled of wet concrete and coffee. I showered, dressed, and turned my phone back on. Notifications flooded in: messages, missed calls, voicemails stacked like stones. I scrolled through a few before setting the phone face down again. Words blurred together: disappointment, selfishness, family duty. Their language of guilt was familiar, but it landed differently now. At work, I tried to focus on numbers that always obeyed rules, ratios, forecasts, clean lines that added up neatly. The office lights reflected in the polished floor, and I could see my own shoes moving one step at a time. By noon, the ache behind my eyes returned. When I finally looked at my phone, one message froze me in place. My father's name. His tone clipped professional. "We expect you to resolve this immediately. You are embarrassing this family." I read it twice, a strange calm settling where anger should have been. When I got home that evening, Taylor was still there, cross-legged on the floor, with takeout containers spread around her. She looked up with that same patient expression that had steadied me through every heartbreak in college. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. The decision had ripened overnight, clear as sunrise. "I'm done letting them write my worth," I said quietly. We spent the next hour at my kitchen table side by side, the light from the pendant lamp soft on the wood. I opened my laptop and began unwinding years of connection bank transfers, shared accounts, credit cards that linked to theirs. Each click sounded final, but not cruel. I removed their names from everything one after another. I canceled the card Amanda used for her endless shopping. I froze the family support transfer I'd been sending each month. Taylor poured us each a glass of wine, her hand brushing mine every so often in quiet reassurance. When I opened my email, I didn't rush the words. I wrote the truth slowly, like laying bricks. Every loan, every unreturned dollar, every moment I'd been told generosity was love. I attached the spreadsheet I'd built, $25,743, and described what that number represented. Not money, but years of being measured by it. I ended with one sentence that felt heavier than the rest. "If my belonging depends on my balance, I choose myself." The send button was small, unremarkable. My finger hovered for a heartbeat, then pressed. The screen blinked, and it was done. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the sound of my own breathing steadying me. Taylor gathered the plates, her movements quiet and unhurried. "You're free," she said softly, as if naming something fragile. That night, I packed a small overnight bag and went home with her. Her apartment smelled faintly of lavender and paperbacks. We stayed up talking until the words turned to drowsy murmurs. I slept deeper than I had in years. The next morning, the storm began. 17 missed calls, dozens of texts. My mother's voice, tight and trembling in one voicemail, accused me of destroying Amanda's future. My father's tone hardened with every message, each one shorter, colder, like a man rehearsing authority that no longer fit. Amanda's texts were frantic, spelling unraveling with every new line. "They're saying you've ruined everything. The dress is gone. My friends already booked the limo. Everyone's laughing at me." I sat at Taylor's kitchen table, the morning light cutting through blinds and painting thin stripes across my hands. "They're unraveling," I said quietly. "They built their balance on me." Taylor's hand covered mine. "Then it's time they learned to stand on their own." At work, later that morning, the receptionist's voice crackled through the phone. "Miss Thompson, your sister's here. She's very upset." I closed my eyes. "Keep her there. I'll be right down." In the lobby, Amanda stood in tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her voice rising as she argued with security. The sight of her broke something tender in me. I guided her to a small conference room, shutting the glass door behind us. "You've ruined everything," she cried. "The dress, the car, everything's gone. Mom and Dad said it's all your fault." Her pain was real, even if its roots were shallow. I reached for calm. "Amanda, this isn't about prom. It's about limits. About respect." "I don't care about your limits," she said, her voice cracking. "You're supposed to help family, and family is supposed to care about more than money." For a long moment, we stared at each other. I could see the confusion flicker across her face, something unfamiliar, like gravity shifting. The security officer waited just outside, arms folded but patient. "I love you," I said softly. "But you can't come here again like this. You need to go home." Her jaw trembled. "You'll regret this." "Maybe I would." "Maybe not. I hope one day you understand," I said. She left without another word, her heels clicking down the hall, fading until all I heard was the faint hum of air conditioning. When I got back to my desk, I found an email waiting from my father's work address. It was written in his formal corporate tone. "We are deeply disappointed by your selfish behavior. Amanda's experience has been compromised. We expect a resolution." I read it twice, then once more for good measure. No love, no concern, just transaction. I moved it to a new folder labeled Family Documentation and closed my inbox. The days that followed were strangely quiet. I blocked their numbers for a week, not out of spite, but to breathe. Without the constant buzz, my apartment sounded different. I could hear the rain against the windows, the refrigerator humming, the kettle whistling when water reached a boil. Ordinary sounds returned like old friends. By the second week, I met with Dr. Chen, a therapist Taylor had recommended. Her office was small, filled with soft yellow light and the scent of eucalyptus. She listened without judgment as I described the text, the years of responsibility, the exhaustion of being needed but never known. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "What you've experienced is financial exploitation," she said gently. "It often happens in families where love and obligation get tangled. You've been praised for being strong, but that strength was used to keep you giving." The words landed quietly like snow. I stared at the floor until the pattern in the rug blurred. "I thought I was doing what a good daughter does," I said. "Good daughters deserve care too," she replied. After the session, I sat in my car for a long time, watching people cross the street with coffee cups and briefcases. Everyone moving forward without permission. I wanted that motion without apology. I began making small changes. Weekends that had once been spent handling family errands became mornings at a cafe, the kind where people read the paper instead of scrolling. I reached out to friends I'd lost touch with, people who used to laugh with me before my life revolved around saving others from themselves. One of them, Zoe, met me for coffee and shook her head when I told her everything. "We worried about you," she said. "You were always the adult in that family, even as a kid." I smiled, but it was the kind of smile that comes with truth you wish weren't true. 3 weeks after sending the email, a thick envelope arrived at my door. Cream stationery, my father's company logo in the corner. I carried it to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and opened it slowly. Unless you make amends and resume your financial responsibilities, the letter read, we will be forced to reconsider your place in this family. You have 7 days to respond appropriately. No signature of love. Just James and Diana Thompson, neat and tidy as a contract. Relief came first. Then, strangely, peace. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into a file, and labeled it Closure. That evening, I walked the quiet streets near my apartment. Trees swayed gently, the air smelling of rain and earth. Every porch light I passed felt like a small kindness. I thought of my grandfather who used to say, sometimes peace sounds like nothing at all. I finally understood. Back home, I brewed tea, opened my laptop, and looked at the balance in my own account numbers that finally belonged to me. I started a new file labeled Future. It wasn't a plan yet, just a place to begin imagining something that didn't orbit around debt, guilt, or apology. Later that night, I sat by the window as thunder rolled low across the horizon. My phone stayed dark on the counter, silent as a closed door. Somewhere inside that quiet, I felt a shift, not dramatic, not loud. Just a gentle recognition that the house I'd been trying to belong to had never really been home. The rain slowed, tapping soft against the glass. I reached for my notebook and wrote one line across the first page: I will not pay to be loved. Then I closed it, turned off the light, and let the stillness hold me. Outside, the clouds began to clear, revealing a thin strip of moonlight over the trees. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that it would be mine. The first real peace I'd felt in years came on a Tuesday morning when I realized the sun had been shining for an hour before I'd even thought to check my phone. No blinking notifications, no missed calls waiting to ambush me before coffee. The silence felt like an answered prayer. I made breakfast slowly, standing barefoot on the cool tile, the smell of butter and cinnamon drifting through my apartment. I ate at the table instead of the desk, and let the light fall across the papers I'd been too afraid to open. My own bills, my own plans. Simple, ordinary things that finally belonged to me. A few weeks passed that way, work therapy evenings spent walking the quiet streets behind my building. Some nights Taylor joined me, and we'd talk about everything but family. I told her about the letter my parents had sent, the one threatening to disown me, and she just shook her head. They're bluffing, she said. They've always needed you more than you needed them. I wanted to believe her, but some part of me still ached for their voices, softened by love for a version of us that might have existed if money hadn't been the measure. One night, after therapy, Dr. Chen's words stayed with me longer than usual. You're not breaking a family, she'd said. You're ending a pattern. I repeated that sentence all the way home, like a key turning quietly in a lock. I started to look back at my life the way an auditor reviews a ledger. Every gift I'd bought, every bill I'd covered, every favor disguised as affection. Somewhere between the numbers, I saw it clearly, the pattern she meant. It wasn't about greed. It was about control. So I built something new, a life that didn't revolve around anyone else's emergencies. I reconnected with people who had known me before I became the family's provider. Old friends, colleagues, a few who'd faded from my life because I'd been too tired to maintain it. Zoe was one of them. We met for lunch at a cafe downtown, the kind with worn wooden floors and a bell that chimed softly when the door opened. She looked at me over her glass of iced tea and smiled. You look lighter, she said. I think I am, I admitted. For the first time, I can breathe. She nodded. You always carried everyone. It's about time you carried yourself. When I got home that evening, there was an envelope waiting on my doormat. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. My Aunt Catherine. Her letters were rare, but they always came when I least expected them. Inside was a single page. "Your mother called me," she wrote. "She's angry, but mostly embarrassed. I told her you did the right thing. I'm proud of you. Families like ours don't change easily, but you've started something they won't be able to undo. Take care of yourself first." Her words steadied me in a way therapy couldn't. She was part of that same family, but she'd built a different kind of life, quiet, measured, full of boundaries that held firm. The next day I replied with a short note thanking her and asking how she'd managed to live without the guilt that haunted the rest of us. Her answer came a week later. I didn't live without guilt. I just stopped confusing it with love. Something in me settled after that. A month passed before I heard my parents' names again. It was Aunt Catherine who called this time. "Your grandfather's turning 80, she said gently. "There's going to be a gathering. Your parents insisted on inviting you, but I think they're hoping to keep it civil. I thought you should hear it from me first." The idea of walking back into that house made my stomach tighten, but my grandfather had always been different kind, fair, unbothered by appearances. I couldn't skip his celebration because of them. When I arrived, the driveway was already lined with cars. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the windows glowing warm against the dusk. Inside, the air smelled of roast beef and old perfume. My mother stood near the dining table, pearls at her throat, smile rehearsed. My father lingered behind her, hands in his pockets, expression careful. "Sherry." My mother said, her tone sweet but thin. "You came. I came for Grandpa." I answered softly. Her smile faltered just for a heartbeat before she gestured toward the living room where relatives gathered around the fireplace. Amanda sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. When she looked up, our eyes met. No anger this time, just something uncertain, maybe embarrassment. She didn't wave, but she didn't look away either. Dinner was polite but brittle. My parents spoke in half sentences, filling silence with small talk about the weather and local events. When someone mentioned Amanda's prom, my mother's hand tightened around her wine glass. "We managed to make it special," she said, pointedly, glancing at me. "Even with some unexpected challenges." I smiled and turned to my grandfather. "How's the woodworking going, Grandpa? I still have the jewelry box you made me." His eyes brightened. "You kept that old thing?" "Of course," I said. "It's beautiful." The conversation shifted the tension in the room, thinning like fog under sunlight. For the rest of the evening, I focused on him. His laugh, the way his hands trembled just slightly as he poured coffee, the stories he told about fishing trips and childhood winters. Later, as guests drifted away, I overheard Amanda showing photos of her prom to our cousins. She was animated, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. "We ended up finding this vintage shop downtown," she said. "The dress was perfect. Way better than that expensive one, honestly." I paused near the doorway, listening. "We all split the cost of a regular car instead of a limo. It was actually more fun that way." Her voice held no resentment, just contentment. For the first time, I saw the possibility of her growing beyond the habits we'd all been trapped in. When I said goodbye to my grandfather, he squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing, kiddo," he said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." Outside, the night air felt clean and cool. I stood by my car for a long moment, watching light spill from the windows, wondering if they'd ever see what he saw. Over the next few months, the silence between us softened. My mother sent a short text one morning. No demands, no guilt. Just, "I miss our Sunday dinners." No strings attached. I waited 2 days before replying. "Okay, Sunday works." When I arrived, the house felt different, quieter. No one brought up money. My father spoke little, but nodded when I answered him. Amanda looked more grounded, her phone set aside. Over dinner, she told us she'd found a part-time job at the mall. "It's just weekends," she said. "But I like it." "That's great," I told her. "How's it going so far?" She smiled shyly. "Harder than I thought." "But good. I bought my own concert tickets last week." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father gave a small, cautious smile. "That's a start," he said. The room didn't feel healed, but it wasn't fractured either. It felt real. When I drove home that night, the roads were empty. The sky stretched wide and dark above the headlights. I thought about how many years I'd spent chasing approval, believing peace meant pleasing everyone else. But peace, it turned out, was simpler, showing up without selling yourself to stay. A few weeks later, I sat with Dr. Chen for our final scheduled session. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't think they'll ever be the family I imagined," I said. "But I don't need them to be." She smiled. "That's progress." I smiled back. It feels like freedom. That evening, Taylor and I walked along the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and early summer rain. She listened as I told her about Amanda's new job, about my mother's message, about how strange it felt to be part of a family that was slowly learning boundaries without breaking apart. "You did it," she said. "You set the example." Maybe I said, watching the reflection of city lights ripple over the water. Or maybe they just ran out of places to hide. Either way, I'd made peace with the distance between us. Some bridges don't burn, they just stop being one way. By the time we reached the end of the pier, the last streak of daylight had vanished, leaving the horizon the color of slate. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet. Somewhere behind me, a phone buzzed mine, probably another message, another step forward. I didn't check it. For once, I wasn't afraid of what waited on the other side of the screen. The tide moved in slow, steady waves below, brushing against the wood pilings. Each sound felt like punctuation to a story that was finally learning how to pause. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But tonight, the air was cool, my heart was steady, and I knew exactly who I was. A few months later, the air outside held the warmth of early summer, and life had begun to move forward in quiet, steady rhythm. The edges of the old wounds had softened, but I still caught myself tensing when my phone lit up with my father's name. Each time, I would breathe once, remind myself I could choose when to answer, and let it ring. One evening after work, I found a small envelope waiting under my apartment door. The handwriting was careful, almost old-fashioned. Inside was a short note from my mother, asking if I could come for dinner. "Just family," she wrote, as if that word had never been tested. I set it on the counter and stared at it for a long time. I went that Sunday more out of curiosity than hope. The house looked the same, fresh flowers on the porch, the same manicured hedges, the same air of quiet performance, but something about the atmosphere had shifted. Fewer sharp edges, more hesitation. My mother opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look well," she said, and it sounded like a truce offering. Dinner was cautious, the kind of meal where everyone watches their words. Amanda talked about her classes and her job at the mall, twirling her fork between sentences. My father spoke less than usual, though, when he did. His voice carried less certainty, as if he were still deciding which version of himself to be. When he finally looked up, his tone was different, softer. "I was wondering," he began, "if you might have time to look over some retirement documents for me. Just your professional opinion." I set my fork down carefully. "Of course," I said, "if that's all you're asking." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "That's all." Later, after dessert, I sat beside him in the study. Papers covered the desk, neat stacks of statements and handwritten notes. It was strange seeing him uncertain. For years, he'd moved through life like someone who never needed help. Now he adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said quietly, "You've always been good with money. I should have listened to you sooner." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest I'd ever heard. I met his gaze and said, "It's never too late to start being honest." He nodded, folding his hands together. The air in the room felt lighter somehow, as if something invisible had unclenched. When I left that night, Amanda walked me to the door. "Thanks for helping Dad," she said, her voice tentative. "I think he's trying." "I know," I said. "So am I." Outside, the evening was warm, cicadas humming in the distance. I stood by my car and looked back at the house that had once felt like both privilege and prison. The lights glowed through the curtains, soft and distant. I realized I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance, the kind that makes space for peace to grow. Over the next few weeks, small shifts continued. My mother began calling occasionally, but never about money. She talked about her garden, about the book club she'd joined. I listened without suspicion, surprised each time that no request followed. It wasn't closeness, but it was gentler ground. Amanda and I grew closer more easily. Without competition or comparison, we found space for simple things: coffee on Saturday mornings, texts about work, quiet laughs over how strange it felt to finally understand each other. One afternoon, she called in tears over a college essay she couldn't finish. "I can't make it sound like me," she said. "Everything I write sounds like what they expect." "Then stop writing for them," I told her. "Tell the truth. Start there." She came over that evening with her laptop and a half-empty coffee cup, frustration written all over her face. We sat at my kitchen table, and I guided her through questions until the words finally came. "You don't have to be perfect," I said as she typed. "Just honest." By midnight, she had a draft that made us both quiet. It was simple, full of small details about growing up in a house where approval was currency, and learning what real effort felt like after getting her first job. When she hit save, she turned to me, eyes red, but shining. "You know," she said softly, "I was so angry at you last year. I thought you just wanted to hurt everyone. But now I think maybe you were trying to save us." Her words caught me off guard. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I was trying to save myself," I said. "If it helped anyone else, that's just grace." We sat in silence after that, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft buzz of streetlights outside the window. That summer, I took the trip I'd been dreaming of for years, a 2-week visit to Japan. The idea had always been postponed for one reason or another: work deadlines, family obligations, fear of being needed while I was gone. This time, there was nothing to postpone for. Walking through Kyoto's narrow streets, I felt the kind of solitude that doesn't ache. Lanterns glowed along the river, and people spoke in low, melodic voices. I sent postcards to Taylor and Amanda, one with a photograph of a temple, another with a night market lit by strings of gold light. When I returned, Amanda had left a note on my counter. "Welcome home. Dinner on me this time." Beneath it sat a grocery bag filled with fresh vegetables and a small bouquet of daisies. It made me laugh, her way of saying she was learning to give without being asked. Work flourished too. With my energy no longer scattered, I threw myself into a new project, mentoring younger associates who reminded me of myself at 21, eager, disciplined, quietly unsure. One of them, Justin, a consultant from a partner firm, started joining me for late lunches. His humor was dry, his presence calm. I didn't think much of it at first until one afternoon he said, "You talk about boundaries like someone who's learned them the hard way." "I have," I said. "Good," he replied. "They make life easier to share." It was the simplest thing anyone had ever said to me about love. We started seeing each other quietly. No grand gestures, no tangled expectations. He understood that peace for me wasn't silence, but balance. Months slipped by. My savings grew. My days found shape again. The guilt that once hummed beneath everything was gone, replaced by something steady ownership of my life. One afternoon, my father called unexpectedly. His voice was calm, even kind. "Your mother's been thinking about hosting Thanksgiving this year," he said. "We'd like you to come. No expectations, just dinner." I hesitated, then said, "I'll think about it." When the day came, I went. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see how far we'd come. The table looked the same as it always had: crystal glasses, polished silver, the faint smell of rosemary in the air, but the tone was different. No one measured generosity in dollars. No one made comparisons. Conversation flowed around everyday things. My mother asked about my trip, genuinely listening as I described the temples, the food, the quiet grace of people who bowed, even when saying goodbye. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room, Amanda pulled me aside. "You know," she said quietly, "I think Mom's trying to change. It's awkward for her, but she's trying." "I can see that," I said, "and that's enough." Later, before I left, my father handed me a small envelope. "It's just a thank you," he said. Inside was a note, not money. "You were right about balance. We're working on it too." Driving home through the cool night, I felt the kind of peace that comes when no one owes anyone else. The streetlights blurred softly on the windshield, and I realized I wasn't thinking about what might go wrong next, only what was already right. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the quiet car for a moment. The house was dark still. Inside, my phone buzzed with a new message from Justin: "Dinner tomorrow. I'll cook this time." I smiled, setting the phone down. The hum of the world outside felt gentle again, almost like music. In that moment, I understood something simple. Healing isn't one big act. It's the small, consistent choice to live in truth. Every boundary held every quiet forgiveness. Every refusal to trade peace for approval had brought me here. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the years of trying to earn love, I finally believed I deserved it. The night stretched wide and clear beyond my window. Tomorrow would come like any other day, but for the first time in my life, it would arrive on my terms. The morning after Thanksgiving, the world felt still, as if the season itself was pausing before winter. I stood on my balcony wrapped in a blanket, the air carrying that clean, cold scent of distant rain. The trees below had shed their leaves, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the old ache of expectation. Just quiet. Inside, my phone rested on the counter, face down and silent. There was no dread in that silence now, only space. I made coffee slow and unhurried, letting the warmth fill the kitchen. The light through the blinds painted faint gold lines across the table where last night's flowers still stood. They'd begun to droop, but beautifully, so their petals soft and open. Justin was still asleep, his jacket draped over a chair from the night before. He'd stayed after driving me home, listening to my stories about the evening, how my parents had been kind, how Amanda seemed proud of herself, how nothing had been forced. When I told him that my father had handed me a note instead of a bill, he smiled the way he always did, quiet and approving. I poured 2 cups of coffee and walked out to the living room, setting his on the table beside him. He stirred, blinking at the light, and smiled. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I said, "but it's a good kind of restless." He sat up, hair-rumpled voice still soft with sleep. "You look peaceful." "I am," I said, and meant it. Later that afternoon, I met Amanda at a small cafe halfway between my place and our parents' house. She arrived in her work uniform, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair tied in a loose bun. Sorry I'm late, she said, laughing. Some lady argued over a coupon for 20 minutes. That sounds like character building, I said. Maybe for her, she replied, grinning. We talked easily the way sisters are supposed to when there's nothing left to prove. She told me about saving for college, about a boy she liked who played guitar but didn't have a car, and about learning how good it felt to buy something with her own paycheck. I listened, proud, without needing to say so. When we finished eating, she looked at me, her tone softening. You know, I still think about that night, the one with the prom money. I was awful to you. I shook my head. You were 17, and everyone around you taught you that taking was love. We were all following the same rules back then. But you changed them, she said quietly. And it changed everything. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the espresso machine filling the space between us. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, catching in the window glass like distant stars. For the first time, I felt not the weight of history, but the calm of acceptance. That weekend, I visited Aunt Catherine in Boston. Her house smelled of cinnamon and cedar, and she hugged me as if she'd been waiting years to exhale. We spent the afternoon by the fireplace, sipping tea from mismatched cups. She asked about my parents, about Amanda, and finally about me. I'm good, I said simply. Better than I've ever been. She smiled, setting her cup down with a soft clink. You know, it's strange, she said. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It sneaks in quietly when you've stopped looking for it. I think that's exactly what happened, I said. Before I left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a folded letter in her elegant handwriting. For the next time you doubt yourself, it read. Remember that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just breathes. Driving home through the winter dusk, her words lingered with the hum of the tires. Streetlights blurred into soft halos, and I realized that the road back to myself had been paved with smaller choices than I'd imagined. Saying no, saying yes when it was right. Letting time do its quiet work. The next few months moved gently. Work thrived, but I no longer let it define me. I took walks after dinner instead of checking emails, planted herbs on my windowsill, and finally bought the framed print I'd wanted for years, a watercolor of an open window overlooking the sea. It felt like a mirror of my life, still open and endless. My parents called sometimes. Conversations stayed light, no guilt, no expectations. My father told me about their plans to downsize after retirement. My mother sent photos of her garden hands still manicured, but soil under the nails. She looked content in those pictures, and I found myself smiling back at the screen. We didn't say the words "I'm sorry," but we lived them each in our own way. One Saturday morning in late spring, I hosted brunch at my apartment. Taylor arrived first, arms full of pastries, followed by Amanda carrying a vase of tulips she'd bought herself. My parents came last, bringing orange juice and a shy kind of gratitude. The table filled quickly. Laughter plates passed around, sunlight spilling over everything. No one mentioned the past. No one needed to. My father raised his glass halfway through the meal and said almost to himself, "This feels good." My mother reached for his hand. When I looked around that table, I saw something I hadn't dared imagine years ago. Not perfection, not payback, just balance. Everyone had their own seat, their own piece, including me. Later, when the dishes were done and the house was quiet again, Justin wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You did it," he whispered. "Did what?" "Turned pain into something beautiful." I leaned back against him, letting the quiet stretch. "Maybe," I said. Or maybe life just needed room to breathe. That evening, after everyone had gone, I stood by the window and watched the last light fade over the rooftops. The city hummed in the distance, steady and alive. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval to exhale. Amanda's laughter echoed faintly in my mind, my father's cautious smile, my mother's hands resting calmly in her lap. They were finding their own ways forward. So was I. Peace, I'd learned, isn't loud or final. It's a series of small choices that add up to freedom. It's the ability to love people and still keep yourself intact. It's knowing that you can care deeply and still walk away from what harms you. As the sky turned lavender, I reached up and switched off the light, leaving only the soft glow from the window. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of spring rain. And standing there barefoot and unhurried, I realized that the story I'd been living wasn't about loss at all. It was about learning how to stay within my own life, my own skin, my own peace. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know your story too. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, know this: you're not alone. Thank you for being here and for sharing these quiet moments with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep choosing calm over chaos. Because sometimes that's where real freedom begins.